Book titles are important. I want to go to every Christian publisher in America and beg and plead with them to work on making the best book titles that they can. A poor title for a book can be misleading. It can ruin a reader's entire experience of going through a book. For instance, Ahab's House of Horrors may be the worst book title for any book I have ever read. I thought this book would be on what life was like during the reign of Ahab, with an interesting look on what we know about Ahab's time from the biblical record as well as archaeological discoveries. Instead, there were no horrors in this book. It was on the military campaigns of the entire house of Omri, and Ahab was a minor character. The title of the book created frustration for me throughout. And I am once again banging my head against a wall over a book title. This time it is B&H Academics' 2016 release, Progressive Covenantalism, charting a course between dispensational and covenant theology. After my review of Reformed Covenant Theology by Perkins, I had a couple of people ask me what my thoughts were on progressive covenantalism, and my answer was, I have none. I really know nothing about this framework, so I wanted to learn more. So I went online, Googled books on this framework, and when I saw that Kingdom Through Covenant was the foundational book, I thought that going with their second book, Progressive Covenantalism, this would be the ideal place actually to go, because they would be building off the first book, further refining the definition and presentation of progressive covenantalism. So I thought this would be a superior presentation of the view. I was wrong. I read the entire book, and if someone asked me today to define or describe progressive covenantalism, I couldn't do it. I now know how they apply their view to some passages and issues in the Bible, but I don't know the fundamentals of why they apply passages the way they do. So this will be an odd review, as I will tell you a little bit more about a theological framework when I don't know what it is. And with that said, welcome to Rev Reads. If you want to discover more books that will help you to make sense of Scripture as a whole, please subscribe to the channel in order to stay up to date with my latest book reviews. Also, like this video, share it with other people to help them know about theology. So here is what progressive covenantalism provides for you. It provides a look at various passages or issues or points of controversy from a progressive covenantalism perspective. For instance, the first chapter looks at ecclesiology, the doctrine of the church from an Old Testament perspective using the principles of progressive covenantalism. The third chapter looks at our relationship to the Mosaic Law from the same perspective. And then we sort of come back to that subject again by looking at the Sabbath in chapter 6. Chapter 7 covers the warning passages in Hebrews, again from this perspective. Chapter 9 is on Romans 11 and what it means that Israel will be saved. And the final chapter is on how progressive covenantalists handle the land promises made to Abraham. The chapters were, I gotta say, pretty consistent in quality throughout, which was a really nice feature for a multi-author book. The editors did a wonderful job keeping a consistent tone and feel throughout. And while I now know how progressive covenantalism deals with a lot of different sticky wickets or major points of conflict in theology, my main problem is I still don't know what it is. I even went back and read the introduction again upon completing the book in hopes that maybe I was missing an overview of progressive covenantalism. Nope. The book relies too heavily upon kingdom through covenant, to the point where it would be more appropriate if this book would have been called Kingdom Through Covenant Applied instead of Progressive Covenantalism, because the title itself leads the reader to think you're going to be getting a presentation on what this view means, the fundamentals of how progressive covenantalism works, but you're never given that. What I do know about progressive covenantalism now is that the aim for this view is to be a middle of the road view, that they're going to take the best from progressive dispensationalism, the best from covenant theology, and then cut out the worst of both. That being said, I did find this book and the views of the contributors, for a most part, to be a breath of fresh air after reading Reformed Covenant Theology by Perkins. I found their takes on the law, circumcision, and baptism to be a major step. I would even say a leap forward in the right direction in comparison to traditional covenant theology. There were numerous places where I was like, this is really good stuff on those subjects. But as a dispensationalist, I was frustrated by their views on the Israel church relationship as well as on the land promises made to Abraham and how they will be fulfilled. For instance, in the chapter Covenant Life with God from Eden to Holy City, Cannonday, the author of that chapter, makes an argument that goes along with the land chapter by Martin later in the book, that the land of Israel is a type for the entire planet that God is going to remake in an Eden-like state in the eternal state. So when we read about the land promises made to Abraham in prophecy, those promises about the promised land to Abraham and his descendants, it's standing for the entire world. And the frustrating thing about that view is two, one, the Bible never clearly states that, and also I do agree with them in a sense that God's kingdom in the end is going to stretch over the entire world at Christ's return. Christ is going to rule not just over Israel, but over nations. And what I don't understand is why we can't have both a fulfillment to Abraham and his believing physical descendants in the promised land of Israel, and have Jesus ruling in Jerusalem, and then have Jesus extending his rule beyond those borders over other nations and other kingdoms that are under his authority as well. It just seems clear to me, based on what we see in the Bible, in these end times prophecies, and they bring them up in this book, that it includes the nations. The church will benefit from Jesus's rule in the end. But why can't Israel also have its own bordered nation as well during that time? And I also don't see a reason, based on what they propose in this book, why any of their fundamental views would exclude having a millennial kingdom before the final eternal state. They say that their view is not replacement theology, but it is fulfillment theology. In the end, though, it just looks a lot like replacement theology, but with a different name. Second, I was most frustrated in this book in the chapter on the warning passages in Hebrews. They take the view that I see as the worst of possible options on the warning passages, which is the means of salvation view. This is the view that believers cannot or will not apostatize, but the author of Hebrews is warning them against the danger of apostatizing as if they could fall away, but they never could fall away. Now, I find this view to belittle the point that's being made by the author of Hebrews. It's as if we're coming up along behind him, patting him on the head and saying, thanks for the warning, but just so you know, this can't really happen. And it's also really bad parenting. One of the worst parenting moves is to threaten your kids with a punishment that you would never follow through on. If I threatened my kids that I would disown them and kick them out onto the street if they cussed at their mother, that would be a form of psychological abuse and also foolishness. Because if they ever did swear at their mom, I wouldn't kick them out. And then I wouldn't be following through on the threat that I made, and I'm being dishonest. And then I'm also doing the cruel thing to them of threatening to kick them out of the family when I have no intention of ever doing so. They have the following quote in the book by Schreiner. To say that the warnings are artificial if no one can commit apostasy is like saying the call to belief is a charade if all the elect will certainly believe. And I read that and I thought, oh, he gets it. It all is a charade. In the same way that unconditional election makes the gospel call a charade, so too do these warning passages do the same if one cannot fall away. It makes the gospel disingenuous, and it makes this threat disingenuous. Well, This review is going on longer than I wanted it to, so I'm going to kind of end it abruptly here, and I'll just end it by saying I enjoyed reading this far more than reading Reformed Covenant Theology by Perkins. I would also say that Reformed Covenant Theology is a much better presentation of covenant theology than this book as a presentation of progressive covenantalism. So Perkins wins there. His book is a better presentation. I think this book could be very helpful if you have already read Kingdom Through Covenant first. But in my view, you must read that first. And for this book to not be more explicit about this, or to simply include a stronger introduction for those who might not have read that other book first, to me is just a huge negative. So they have this really good presentation on how progressive covenantalism handles various passages and issues. I agree with them in some places, strongly disagree with them in other places. But this is one of those books where I think this title is going to sink the book for far too many interested readers.